LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the November 20th edition of LiberalViewer Monday Media Mixup. Thanks for joining me. I'll be using the 11 best, most newsworthy clips I picked out from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States, for which would be a really informative, educational, fair use, media criticism, and political commentary show for you all today. As you can see from the video title, my main topic is President Joe Biden has foreign policy problems, and that kind of wraps up both the big meeting with President Xi Jinping of China, and the ongoing conflict between Israel and Hamas. And actually, for my political comedy, I have the first few jokes on Saturday Night Live from their Weekend Update segment last Saturday night. Colin Jost and Michael Che, who are both focusing in on these foreign policy problems, which shows just how central they've become to the current political and cultural zeitgeist, I guess. Is that what we are using Saturday Night Live clips for now? I guess I'll talk about that a little more after we watch that brief clip together. This is just the beginning of Weekend Update. If you go down to the link under sources in the video description, you can see this entire segment free on the Saturday Night Live YouTube channel. You can see the entire episode on the NBC website. But here's the first few jokes that fit my topic I picked out to talk about you after we watch together over here.
After President Biden's successful meeting with China's President Xi Jinping, reporters asked Biden if he still believed that Xi was a dictator. And I don't know if Biden was supposed to say yes, because look at this reaction from Secretary of State Antony Blinken.
Did you still refer to President Xi as a dictator? This is a term that you used earlier this year.
Well, look, he is.
Oh, man. That's the same face I make when my uncle starts a story by mentioning the race of the waitress. It's actually the same. It's actually the same face I made when I heard Biden say this about LL Cool J.
LLJ Cool J. By the way, that man's got biceps bigger than my thighs.
LLJ Cool J? I think the second J stands for Jesus.
Insiders are concerned that President Biden's chances for re-election could be damaged by his unwavering support for Israel. But I think the bigger problem for Biden is that he is 6 years older than Israel.
Now, I thought some of those jokes were kind of funny, and especially the use of previous Joe Biden clips in the Colin Jost jokes, the LL Cool LJ or whatever. That was good work from the writers at Saturday Night Live, I guess, but they didn't really make fun of Joe Biden's foreign policy. If you noticed, they basically turned all the jokes the jokes about Joe Biden were about his age, not really about his foreign policy. Even ending with Michael Che's joke about his real problem with his policy on Israel, the Israel versus Hamas conflict being that he's older than Israel, which, it's a good joke there, but there actually is an age problem that Joe Biden has, and that's something I'm going to show you later when I get to clip number 7. Oh, by the way, if you look down in the video description, I have short summaries of all 11 clips. Clip 7 is a discussion between the host of Meet the Press, Kristen Welker, and their poll expert, Steve Kornacki, talking about how by the latest NBC News poll that shows Biden is in deep trouble. And one of the reasons is this freeze frame here. Sorry, I got to get the audio going here. This freeze frame from that poll, it's a poll on approve versus disapprove of Biden's handling of the Israel-Hamas war. And all voters, it's 34% approval, 56% disapproval. But look at this is people over 65 versus 18 to 34. For people over 65, he is doing pretty well, 53% to 40 approve versus 41% disapprove. But in the 18 to 34 range, it's 20% approve, 70% disapprove. You can see Steve Kornacki drew like he's 62-point spread there between the old people and the young people. So that's like the real age problem that Joe Biden has with his foreign policy. And I'll talk about that more with some of the clips I'm showing you and how it's affecting the way Democrats are not quite as pro-Israel as almost all U.S. politicians have been for almost my entire lifetime. And I'll get to that with the newsmaker clips, but I do want to show you the news summaries from longest to shortest. This week, Fox News Sunday had the longest news summary because they have 2 reporters, but only one in Israel. In northern Israel, they have Alex Hogan, but then they have Lucan Tomlinson back at the White House doing all the political spin. And basically, there's a lot of partisan political bias in this Fox News Sunday news summary, as we've come to expect from Fox News, and especially, I mean, all the way up to the end. Spoiler alert, they're going to remind you that today, during my Monday Media Mix-Up, today is Joe Biden's 81st birthday. That's right. And if you watch Fox News today, they reminded you every hour, at least once an hour, that Joe Biden turned 81 today. And it's the age issue that you saw on Saturday Night Live, and is one of the pieces of partisan political bias that you'll see in this Fox News Sunday news summary that I'll talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
Hello from Fox News in Washington. The IDF continuing to scour Gaza hospitals where it says Hamas is hiding tunnels, weapons, command centers, and possibly hostages. As Israel works to eradicate Hamas in northern Gaza, it is beginning to shift its sights further south in what would be a new front in the Israeli offensive. But international calls for both a ceasefire and the release of hostages intensify amid concerns about the mounting civilian death toll. And late last night, reports from the Washington Post began to surface that Israel and Hamas are on the verge of a U.S. brokered deal for a multi-day ceasefire in exchange for the release of dozens of hostages. In a moment, we'll speak with Delaware Democratic Senator Chris Coons, who sits on the Foreign Relations Committee. And we'll get the latest from the White House on that possible deal between Israel and Hamas from Fox News correspondent Lucan Tomlinson. But we start with Fox News correspondent Alex Hogan live on the ground in northern Israel. Hello, Alex.
Hi, Shannon. U.S. officials as well as Israeli officials say that so far there has been no agreement in the potential deal to release 50 hostages in exchange for a 3 to 5 day ceasefire, among other things. But officials from Qatar today are saying that the conversations are mainly logistical about what needs to be done. And today in Gaza, the IDF is moving forward. It says paratroopers managed to go inside and raid the home of Hamas officials. Ground forces also located new ammunition warehouses as they look for tunnels. But 6 weeks into the war, more than half of the population is out of their home. The UN says that Gaza is only getting 10% of its required food and only 6% of the fuel that it received before the war. Aid organizations warn that those fuel shortages will cause the healthcare system to collapse.
Due to the lack of gas, we were forced to buy firewood, cook our food with firewood, and bake our bread using firewood. Our entire day depends on firewood.
Even Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said without more humanitarian aid, allies will find it difficult to give longer-term support for Israel's war. At the same time, Israel is also fortifying its northern front to field off attacks from Hezbollah.
We use jets, we use tanks, we use infantry, we use anti-tank missiles on our own.
Exchanged fire is nearly constant now, but with the use of more advanced weapons, the IDF says there's the growing fear of how quickly everything could change in this conflict.
Hezbollah is deploying all kind of arsenal that it has in its disposal. Anything from Russian equipment to Iranian equipment to equipment that he's being deployed and developed on its own.
Here in the north, besides troops and tanks, entire cities and villages have turned into ghost towns. And on the other side of the border in Lebanon, people are fleeing there too.
Right now, Israel is striking back at sites in Lebanon as Hezbollah just earlier today fired rockets, mortars, and anti-tank missiles here. Shannon.
Alex Hogan, we appreciate you there live in Israel. Thank you so much. Let's turn now to Fox News correspondent Lucan Tomlinson. He's live at the White House as the president has laid out, Lucas, this sweeping argument for supporting both Israel and Ukraine, saying it's really the same fight.
That's right, Shannon. And the White House says it has not reached a deal on the hostages yet. And in a first, President Biden says he'll sanction any Israeli settlers who commit violence against Palestinians in the West Bank.
The Gerald Ford strike group was supposed to be home for Thanksgiving before being extended in the Mediterranean due to the war between Israel and Hamas over fears it could spread. Writing in the Washington Post, President Biden says both Putin and Hamas are fighting to wipe a neighboring democracy off the map. America cannot and will not let that happen. President Biden recently met China's president face-to-face for the first time in a year. Xi reportedly told Biden China has no plans to invade Taiwan. He gave a similar pledge to Obama in the Rose Garden in 2015, not to militarize his man-made islands in the South China Sea, a pledge he did not honor.
Well, look, he is. I mean, he's a dictator.
It's Biden's poll numbers that are also causing Americans to wince. Biden's approval numbers remain underwater on a range of issues from the Israel-Hamas war to immigration and inflation. More than 500 political appointees and staffers across 40 government agencies sent a letter to President Biden protesting his support for Israel in its war against Hamas.
We don't make our decisions based on polls. We make our decisions based on what we believe are the best foreign policy judgments on behalf of the American people.
Tomorrow, President Biden turns 81. It's supposed to be a low-key affair here at the White House with more attention on the annual turkey pardon. And China will be hosting Arab diplomats in the hopes of bringing peace to Gaza. Shannon?
Lucan Tomlinson at the White House. Lucas, thank you. Joining us now, Delaware Democratic Senator Chris Coons. He's a member.
And I won't have a clip of the Chris Coons interview. I will have Mike Pompeo responding to progressive Democratic Representative Rashida Tlaib calling for a ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas conflict, and Mike Pompeo, as you might expect, isn't in favor and doesn't get very heavily cross-examined by Shannon Bream on Fox News about that. But I think you saw the political bias I was talking about. Alex Hogan mostly had the pro-Israel bias in her reporting. That is typical of Fox News reporting on this conflict. There was actually a little bit about the destruction in Gaza in the report, which is more than I usually see on Fox News, but I don't think they had the casualty numbers and not the focus on the Al-Shifa hospital controversy that you'll see in some of the other news summaries. And then, of course, Lucan Tomlinson, he had the spin that I was talking about when he talked about Biden meeting with Xi, he even showed like the little a bit of the calling him a dictator clip that they made fun of over in the Saturday Night Live jokes I showed at the beginning. And of course, that made it into the Fox News summary, although you'll also see it on the ABC This Week with George Stephanopoulos news summary from Martha Raddatz that I thought was actually pretty good. So I'm not saying that alone makes for a bad news summary. And you saw there that they also showed bad polls for Biden right in the news summary right at the beginning, as well as they're downplaying his 81st birthday, as I promised you before I showed the clip. Now, this next clip is actually probably the best reporting of what's going on in the Israel-Hamas conflict, which Face the Nation has been doing really well. They only have one reporter this week, and he's reporting from Jerusalem, but he's the reporter who a couple weeks ago was the person in Gaza. It's Imtiaz Tyab, I think I'm mispronouncing his name. You'll hear Margaret Brennan pronounce it correctly in what may be the best news summary regarding the Israel-Hamas conflict, like I said, that I'll talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. We begin with the deteriorating conditions in Gaza and new warnings by the United Nations that disease is a growing concern as civilians shelter in crowded spaces with scarce food and water. Meanwhile, it appears a deal with Hamas to release some hostages in exchange for Israel allowing in some aid to Gaza is taking shape. Qatar's prime minister, who is involved with mediating the talks, said today that an agreement is within reach. Imtiaz Tyab is in Jerusalem with the latest.
They walked for days from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem in their thousands to demand the hostages being held in Gaza be released.
Bring them home now!
And to vent their fury at Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's failure to meet regularly with the families of captives.
Our government isn't talking to them, isn't telling them what's going on, what's on the table, what are the offers, what are the reasons for and against. Nothing. Nobody's talking to them.
Multiple parties, including the U.S., have been negotiating for the release of captives, potentially in exchange for a 5-day pause in fighting and a major increase in humanitarian aid. The negotiations remain ongoing as Israel appears to be expanding its offensive against Hamas from northern Gaza to the south, where hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were told to flee for their safety. But nowhere, it seems, is safe. Massive Israeli airstrikes across Gaza over the past 24 hours have killed dozens of civilians. Many of the victims are children whose tiny bodies were wrapped in white cloth before being taken for burial, as loved ones try to make sense of the incomprehensible. But it's the Al-Shifa hospital in Gaza City which is being called a death zone. The World Health Organization were able to access it after Israeli forces took control of the main health center earlier this week and are working to evacuate the remaining medical staff and patients, including 32 babies in critical condition. The Israeli military took us to the sprawling hospital complex on a late-night visit to show us what they say is evidence of a Hamas command center that was operating underground, which includes this apparent sand-filled tunnel opening and these weapons. The existence of the apparent Hamas command center, which the U.S. has said it also has intelligence on, has been central to Israel's justification for its assault on the hospital and beyond.
There's been so much damage, so much devastation to this hospital because this hospital was described as a command center for Hamas. Did you find a command center?
Oh, yeah. We found a few.
What does that mean, a few?
Here, okay, I'll talk about it. But what you see here is a fraction of the equipment we found.
And since our visit, the Israeli military has made multiple statements about the so far underwhelming evidence of the apparent Hamas command center at Al-Shifa, saying we were only shown, quote, preliminary findings and that more details would be shared soon. Hospitals, of course, have protected status under international law, Margaret, but Israel insists its assault on Gaza's largest and most important medical facility falls within those boundaries.
Great reporting now from Imtiaz Tyab in Jerusalem. We go now to the Republican chair of the House Intelligence Committee, Mike Turner.
And I don't have a clip from Mike Turner, but because I'm going to show a clip of Democratic Senator Chris Van Hollen from CBS News Face the Nation. If you're looking down in the clip list, that's clip 9. And I've chosen that clip to show you how the increasing pro-Palestinian support within the Democratic Party is causing Democratic politicians and even the Biden administration to do more to care about the death and destruction that is happening in Gaza and trying to minimize Israeli attacks causing civilian casualties. And you saw the whole controversy there about the Al-Shifa hospital. I think CBS News did a pretty good job both of showing some of the reality of what's happening in Gaza and the controversy about the hospital. And you saw their reporter there at the end sort of voicing his skepticism about what is, the underwhelming evidence that Israel has given so far justifying the attack on that hospital. But the thing is, where we are viewing this conflict from, we are totally dependent on basically secondhand information or even third-hand information when we're watching these reports, and all we can do is try to get information from as many sources as possible and sift through it and try to figure out what's really happening. And maybe it will only be in the future looking back on the past, but we'll have a better view. But as someone who's studied the history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict over many decades, the thing is that the people on both sides have kind of their own separate histories about what happened in 1947 and 1948 and 1967 and the Oslo Accords. And I mean, there are all sorts of events where the accepted history totally diverges. That's one of the things that I find so maddening about this particular conflict, that I actually know quite a bit about and have changed my views significantly over the years. And maybe I'll talk about that a little more when I get through the rest of the clips. But like I said, I thought CBS News Face the Nation did the best job of reporting on the conflict this week, as they have most of the week since October 7th. This next clip is ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. They have Martha Raddatz and then their reporter Matt Gutman reporting from Jerusalem, I believe. And they do an okay job, and they actually do the best job of setting up what I picked as the topic this week. You'll see Martha Raddatz right in the first sentence of her news summary talks about Joe Biden wanting to be a foreign policy president, and sneaks in the whole controversy about calling Chinese President Xi Jinping a dictator. I'm going to keep practicing that, and I'm going to get it right eventually. But that's what she said. That's my President Xi joke. But anyway, the news summary here puts both of those in there, and then gets over to the Israel versus Hamas conflict with their reporter Matt Gutman. In the news summary I'll talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
Good morning and welcome to This Week. President Biden likes to think of himself as the foreign policy president. But no matter the depth and breadth of his experience, this was a challenging and even harrowing week. In San Francisco, a summit that signaled a thaw in relations with China ended with President Biden undiplomatically calling China's president a dictator. And in Israel, as we come on the air this morning, there is reporting that Israel and Hamas are close to a deal to free dozens of women and children held hostage in Gaza in exchange for a 5-day freeze in fighting. The White House says no final deal has been struck, but the Washington Post report has raised hopes once again. ABC's Matt Gutman in Tel Aviv leads us off.
This morning, after weeks of negotiations, amidst Israel's relentless pounding of Gaza, Israel and Hamas inching closer to a hostage deal. On the heels of that Washington Post report, Israeli officials telling ABC News the deal would see at least 50 hostages released in exchange for a 5-day ceasefire and the release of Palestinian women and minors from Israeli jails. The ceasefire would allow what's being described as a massive increase in humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip, which the UN says is now beset by hunger. It comes amid accusations in Israel of governmental foot-dragging.
They're taking the gloves off. They're now demanding the ouster of the Israeli government for its failure to broker a hostage deal.
This 5-day march by hostage families ending Saturday in frustration. This relative saying, first bring them home, then fight your war. It's a war that so far has left over 12,000 Palestinians dead, according to the Hamas-run health ministry, and increasing calls for the Israeli government to cease fire. The UN reporting that dozens have been killed in an Israeli airstrike at a UN-run school on Saturday, currently serving as a shelter for displaced Palestinians. The health ministry saying at least 50 people were killed in the strike on the Al-Fahuri school. The Israeli military saying the incident is under review. And Israel's siege of Gaza's hospitals also drawing international international condemnation. On Saturday, a team from the World Health Organization visiting Al-Shifa Hospital, Gaza's largest, describing piles of medical and human waste and calling the hospital a death zone. Scores of critically ill patients remain, but today 30 premature infants taken out of their incubators last week due to lack of electricity have been evacuated. They join other patients and displaced people from the hospital seen marching south, joining the flood of Palestinians picking their way past the ruins of Gaza City.
Martha, over the past month, the issue of the hostages has emerged from a back burner issue to one of the main priorities of the Israeli government. Now, that's partly due to the public pressure being brought on the government by the families of the hostages in Gaza, but also due to an understanding that time is not on the Israeli government's side. An increasing number of those hostages have been found dead. And while both sides appear to be very close to inking that deal, we are told there is so little trust on either side that this deal could evaporate at any moment. Martha.
Matt Gutman, thanks for all your reporting. Joining us now is President Biden's Deputy National Security Advisor, John Feiner.
And actually, I will have a clip of John Feiner from that interview by Martha Raddatz from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. But I also thought that Matt Gutman and Martha Raddatz there did a good job of showing a more balanced perspective than you see a lot of times in the media. I mean, we have a very pro-Israel media here in the United States, especially if you compare it to the kind of stories they get even in Europe, never mind in Arab countries or the southern half of the southern hemisphere, or the emerging South is what they used to call the third world is now more accurately called the emerging South, I guess. But there's a whole bunch of non-aligned nations in the United Nations who don't really like the United States, and certainly not U.S. policy on Israel, and not big fans of Israel. And that is, I think, something that is reflected in the media you get in most of the world, but not the U.S. media. I think I have this old video that from, I think, was it 2009 or let me I'll find it for you. I have, Fox News bias for Israel in Gaza conflict. This is my video from 14 years ago. From January 2009, where I was talking about Fox News bias and other media bias, even on NBC. Here for my live viewers, I'll put a link to that video in the live comments. That video has actually gotten a lot of more views in the last 6 weeks since this latest Israel versus Hamas Gaza conflict. And it's kind of amazing how things haven't really changed. That's what I was thinking about, that the U.S. media is really pro-Israel, but also things have been changing. I think that's what we're seeing in what I was just showing you, that the except for Fox News, that there's a lot of more of the Palestinian view presented in the U.S. media, and the destruction in Gaza is being talked about a lot more and shown a lot more, and that's also true in the next two news summaries, although they don't include any reports from people on the scene. I think, and I said that Matt Gutman was in Jerusalem, but he was actually in Tel Aviv. That was a mistake I made before I showed the last clip. But this next clip is just Kristen Welker talking about the conflict, showing some video, and it's shorter, and the penultimate news summary I'll talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
Sunday morning, NBC News has learned that U.S., Israeli, and Hamas negotiators are closing in on a deal to release some of the nearly 240 hostages held in Gaza in exchange for a pause in fighting. But these sources caution nothing has been finalized yet. The outline of a deal has been put together during weeks of talks in Doha, Qatar. One senior Israeli official tells NBC News as the military pressure increases, the chances of a release of hostages grows because Hamas is desperate for a ceasefire. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is also under pressure. Families of the hostages have been on a 5-day march from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem and are fiercely criticizing the prime minister for not doing more to secure their release. On Saturday, Netanyahu emphasized that no deal is done.
Regarding the hostages, there are a lot of unfounded rumors, a lot of incorrect publications. I would like to clarify, until this very moment, there wasn't a deal, but I'd like to promise you that we do have something to say. We will report on that.
And in a Washington Post op-ed, President Biden wrote, quote, as long as Hamas clings to its ideology of destruction, a ceasefire is not peace. But at a press conference earlier this week, the president sounded more optimistic.
Look, I have been deeply involved in moving on the hostage negotiation. I don't want to get ahead of myself here because I don't know what's happened in the last 4 hours, but we've gotten great cooperation from the Qataris.
Joining me now is Deputy National Security Advisor John Feiner. John.
So, yeah, that news summary was fairly brief and was mostly focused on this supposed hostage release that now, more than 24 hours later, at least last time I looked at the news, still hasn't happened. But actually, this final news summary here from CNN's State of the Union, Jake Tapper, in some ways, I was saying how the CBS and ABC news summaries really showed the negative effect on Gaza and Palestinians and the death and destruction. But even though what Jake Tapper does here is shorter, in some ways, I think it evokes the most sympathy. There is some graphic video here that, he says in the clip, he gives a warning of graphic video, but I don't know. I didn't think it was that graphic, but still the story he tells, I think, really evokes sympathy for the people who are the victims of the really intense Israeli military action that I'll talk about with you a little more after we watch the final news summary together over here.
Hello, I'm Jake Tapper in Washington, D.C., where the State of our Union is praying for peace and praying for an end to this conflict as soon as possible. Pro-Palestinian protesters took to the streets all over the United States this weekend as President Biden tried to defend his support for Israel amid a growing divide in his party over Israel's war against Hamas, which has led to the displacement of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians and the death of thousands of civilians in Gaza. The World Health Organization says the Al-Shifa hospital, targeted by Israel as a Hamas headquarters, is now, quote, a death zone. And hours ago, 31 neonatal babies finally were evacuated from inside the hospital, also in northern Gaza. And I want to warn you, this footage that I'm about to show you, it's very disturbing. A horrifying new video showed dozens of bodies, including women and children, lying amid wreckage and covered in dust after a blast rocked a UN school that was, according to UN authorities, being used as a shelter. The UN said it did not know who was responsible for the incident. The Israeli military said it was reviewing what happened. On Saturday, President Biden again rejected calls for a ceasefire in the war. President Biden writing in the Washington Post that, quote, a ceasefire is not peace. He underlined his support for a two-state solution in the long term, as his administration is working hard to strike a deal between Hamas and Israel to release the hundreds of hostages still being held in Gaza in exchange for some form of pause in the hostilities. And joining me now is the U.S. Deputy National Security Advisor, John Feiner. John, thanks for joining.
And you see a lot of the programs went to Deputy National Security Advisor John Feiner there. He actually, he almost did the full Ginsburg, where you go on all 5 of the programs, but he only did 4. He didn't go on Fox News Sunday. but I don't know, do they even count as a news organization? Not really, but I guess they only count when it comes to the full Ginsburg, maybe. But that was the last of the news summaries. You saw how Jake Tapper really emphasized the death, destruction, and pain visited upon Palestinians in the CNN State of the Union brief news summary, just like you saw from CBS and ABC. NBC kind of focused more on the imminent release of hostages that, at least as of this broadcast, hasn't happened yet. And Fox News talked about that, and then talked about the point of view of the Israeli Defense Forces and the Republican Party, which is who they apparently are the mouthpieces for. So that is the 5 news summaries all juxtaposed, and you can decide which one you think is best. And well, Fox News is pretty much the worst, just by definition, if, in terms of any sort of rational criteria. But otherwise, you can tell me what you think of the other 4 juxtaposed. ABC this week, like I said, pretty much nailed the topic that I decided to take about the foreign policy of the Biden administration being a problem. And I showed you that screenshot earlier of Steve Kornacki and the host of NBC News' Meet the Press, Kristen Welker, talking about how the Israel versus Hamas war is really cutting down on Biden's popularity with people between the ages of 18 and 34. And that is part of a whole big bad poll from NBC News that has a lot of bad news for the Biden administration. And that's actually kind of the first newsmaker clip. I mean, it's not really a newsmaker clip, but it's important context. And it's going to explain, it's going to give you context to that one screenshot I showed you earlier. It's not the whole poll analysis from the 2 of them, but it's the part that talks about Biden's foreign policy and how it's hurting him, and how this is the first time that Trump is actually beating Biden in an NBC News poll, although it's still within the margin of error. So I guess that's something to make us not wake up in the middle of the night screaming. But you can tell me what you think, or if this is too scary for you after we watch that clip together over here.
As the war between Israel and Hamas rages on, it is having a transformative impact in our politics. We have a brand new NBC News poll out this morning, which shows the toll it is taking on the president. I'm joined now by national political correspondent Steve Kornacki to take us through the numbers. Steve, some real stunning highlights here in this poll.
Absolutely, and I think you're right to set it up that way. What's happening in the Middle East, it really does seem to be connecting with what's happening domestically in our politics. Let's start with the bottom line here. President Biden, what is his job approval rating? We measure it now at 40%, with 57% disapproving. The significance, that is the lowest President Biden has ever measured in our poll in terms of job approval. And just look at the sea change from the start of this year. Remember, early this year, Democrats coming off a strong 2022 midterm. He was almost even. Now he's 17 points underwater on this question.
Significant dip there, Steve.
It is, and you can actually, if you take a look here by party, I think it's significant for 2 reasons. One, independents, obviously, more than 2 to 1 disapprove. You don't want to be there as an incumbent president, but I think equally significant, no surprise, 7% of Republicans approve of Joe Biden's job performance, but 3 times as many Democrats, 21%, that's more than 1 in 5, say they disapprove. You need much more unified support in your own party if you're going to have a successful re-election campaign. And we mentioned the drop in that approval rating and the connection to the Middle East, and here it is. On foreign policy, 33% approve of Joe Biden's job performance. Just in September, we asked the same question, and it was 41-53.
These numbers surprised our own pollsters, Steve, with one saying he cannot remember a time when a foreign entanglement that didn't involve U.S. troops had the capacity to transform the electorate. And that's not the case in this poll.
No, and go even a step further on this one. I think this jumps out at you, too. Overall, this is the handling of the Israel-Hamas war. And again, it kind kind of measures overall up with Biden's foreign policy approval. But look at this. Among the oldest group of voters, 65 plus, there's a majority who approve of how Biden is handling this. That's plus 12. Look at the youngest group of voters. 20 approve, 70% disapprove. He is 50 points underwater with the youngest group of voters. That is a 62-point net swing between youngest and oldest on this topic of Israel and Hamas.
And it's a critical group of voters that he needs in order to win re-election, that's for sure.
Absolutely. So we're showing you Biden's problems here, and the question is, who will the Republicans nominate?
So yeah, that is the rest of the poll results about the Republicans, and I'm actually going to show one of those possible Republicans, Governor Ron DeSantis, in the final clip. It's kind of the cross-examination of the week from CNN's Jake Tapper on whether Governor Ron DeSantis, who is like a champion against anti-Semitism when it comes from the left and pro-Palestinian groups, is like nowhere to be found when it comes from one of his supporters or quasi-supporters, Elon Musk and Twitter. But that's clip 11, and we just watched clip 7, so there's a while between 7 and 11, and those are the other 3 newsmaker clips I want to show you. First, I want to show you 2 Democrats who seem to be responding to those poll numbers you just saw from Kristen Welker and Steve Kornacki that show that there is a big part of the Democratic Party who wants Democrats to not be so pro-Israel, to think about the effect of U.S. policy on the lives of Palestinians who live in Gaza, and whether the really hated Netanyahu government is really trying to minimize civilian casualties. I mean, Benjamin Netanyahu is like the worst face of this conflict as far as Israel goes on the international stage and on the domestic U.S. Media stage that you could even possibly imagine, because he's like corrupt and he's ultra right wing, and it's a disaster for Biden with a certain segment of the progressive Democratic Party. And that's why I think you're going to see in these next 2 clips Deputy National Security Advisor John Feiner from the Biden administration is going to do everything he can to talk about how the Biden administration is looking into what happened at the Al-Shifa hospital and is trying to get the Netanyahu government to minimize civilian casualties, but he can't say too much because he doesn't want to alienate those like over 65 people who like the Biden embrace of Israel after the horrors of October 7th. And anyway, I'll talk about that balancing act after we watch John Feiner talking to Martha Raddatz on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos yesterday together over here.
And I want to talk about Israeli forces that are conducting and have conducted that multi-day raid into Gaza's largest hospital, Al-Shifa. We're getting reports from aid groups that went in just yesterday that the situation inside that hospital is now desperate and a death zone. What should the Israelis be doing?
So, we have talked at length about Al-Shifa in recent days. It's really a microcosm of the challenges associated with this conflict. Obviously, this is the largest hospital in Gaza. It is the most advanced hospital in Gaza. It is a place where there are patients who are acutely ill and where there have been civilians who gathered there seeking some sort of sanctuary and refuge. And we believe all of those lives are of equal value to lives anywhere and are sacred, the lives of innocents. That said, we have also been clear that we have information, not just Israeli information, but American intelligence that suggests that Hamas, over a period of time, has built up infrastructure, military infrastructure, in and around and underneath that hospital, has used it as a command and control center for the conduct of combat operations, and that makes it a legitimate area of concern for the Israeli Defense Forces. We've also said that in and of itself does not give Israel the right, in our view, it would not be something we support to take airstrikes against that hospital, to fight combat operations in and around that hospital. So that is the box that Israel finds itself in, and it finds itself there largely because Hamas has chosen to use a hospital as a place from which to fight. And so we have been clear to the IDF that they need to handle this situation in a very sensitive, very delicate way, and that's an area of ongoing conversation between us and the government of Israel.
Let me just ask you quickly then, do you feel Israel is doing enough to adhere to the law of war to minimize civilian casualties?
What I'd say about this is we are not going to make, my colleagues have said the same, real-time judgments, real-time verdicts on the way they're conducting this conflict, including any particular incidents. What we are going to say, though, is our position is that they need to adhere to the law of war, as all armies do, as the United States Army needs to when it conducts combat operations, and that when we see incidents that concern us, as we have, we raise them directly and right away with our Israeli counterparts and get clarity and get their answers as to what they're seeking to accomplish and what has happened. It is hard to get real-time information out of Gaza. First reports are often wrong. And one thing I will add is that Hamas certainly adheres to no such standard and holds itself to no such standard when it comes to how it's fighting this conflict. And that's one of the other challenges that Israel faces, is an enemy, an adversary that not only doesn't adhere to the laws of war, but openly, wantonly perpetrates violations of them every chance it gets.
So it sounds like you have raised some concerns over the past month or so. Thank you for joining us this morning. We appreciate it.
And Deputy National Security Advisor John Feiner didn't contradict what Martha Raddatz said there at the end, that raise concerns. And I guess that's kind of the way they're threading the needle in the Biden administration. They're not telling Israel what to do so they don't alienate those over 65 Democrats who are strong Israel supporters, but they're also doing everything they can to bring up the need to minimize civilian casualties, and they're talking about the back and forth on the Al-Shifa hospital and trying to win back some of those young voters who are like 20% approving, 70% disapproving of the way the Biden administration is handling the conflict, as you remember from that from that Meet the Press screenshot showing the NBC News poll. And I think you can see that even more strongly from the Democratic senator from Maryland, Chris Van Hollen, talking to Margaret Brennan about these exact same issues, specifically a letter that he and some other Democrats sent to the Biden administration, pressuring them or pressing them to take into account these humanitarian concerns and the minimizing civilian casualties. And you can hear Chris Van Hollen explain that himself in this final clip from a Democrat. Then I'm going to show you two Republicans. But here's the final Democratic member of Congress, or Senator Chris Van Hollen, making the same points over here.
So you wrote a letter this month endorsing more funding for Israel, but also pressing the Biden administration on its assessment of whether these military goals are actually achievable and how that country is protecting civilians. Are you satisfied with what the White House has told you?
We're still awaiting a public response from the Biden administration. We've not received that public response yet. We have had outreach at the highest levels, and we've been offered, those of us who signed the letter, to meet with the president's top national security and foreign policy team to discuss some of those issues. But we are still awaiting an answer to the letter because we asked a lot of questions that we think are important to get answers to.
This is hurting the president with his fellow Democrats, isn't it?
Well, I don't know if it's hurting the president with fellow Democrats. I do think it's important that the president speak out more clearly on this issue. Let me say this. In the aftermath of the horrific Hamas attacks of October 7th, you have, I think, virtually every senator supporting Israel's objective of going after Hamas and neutralizing them from a military perspective. No more October 7th. Right. But we also need to do, as Secretary Blinken said, how Israel conducts this operation is important. And so many of us were concerned just a few weeks ago when one of the White House national security spokesperson was asked if the United States has any red lines. And the answer was no, which means anything goes. And that cannot be consistent with American interests and American values. So that's why we're asking these questions.
It can't be consistent because that's not the policy for any other country that the United States provides military aid to.
Well, that's right. Look, we have a policy of trying to make sure that our funds are used in a manner that advances our interests and our values. And if you look at what's happening right now in Gaza, the desperate humanitarian crisis, clearly that's more that could be done. And if you look at the level of civilian casualties, Secretary Blinken himself has acknowledged that there are additional measures that the Netanyahu government can take to reduce the high level of civilian casualties, 2/3 of them children. So this is why we're asking the president questions. We want to work with the president to get more assurances that our interests and values will be protected.
Okay, we have to take a break.
And I think that clip shows that the Democratic Party is moving towards a more balanced policy. That, you know, you saw John Feiner from the Biden administration on the one hand, and then Senator Chris Van Hollen, he's not like a member of the squad, or Rashida Tlaib, who I'm going to talk about in a second. He's a fairly centrist Democrat from Maryland in the Senate, who is also trying to push the Biden administration to do more to consider the effects on Palestinians and to rein in some of the worst abuses of the Israeli military that, I mean, you saw from some of those news summaries how Israel does not really seem to be minimizing civilian casualties, and as the largest funder of the Israeli military outside the United States should have some responsibility for that, and that's what hopefully will be increasingly apparent in the Biden foreign policy, as you know, the poll numbers I've been talking about, where he needs to be more responsive to the younger voters in the Democratic Party who don't want the blind allegiance to an Israeli government led by Benjamin Netanyahu that I've been talking about. But I'm also going to show you a couple Republicans here. The clip after next, the final clip, is Governor of Florida Ron DeSantis talking about anti-Semitism with Jake Tapper, and it's only tangentially related to the topic, and I just included it because I really like Jake Tapper's cross-examination there, in contrast to this next clip, which is former Trump Secretary of State Mike Pompeo on Fox News Sunday, getting almost no cross-examination from the host Shannon Bream. I think there's almost a mistake in the question that Shannon Bream is asking, because it's really about how the member of the squad, Rashida Tlaib, is calling for a ceasefire to end the you'll see went on in Rashida Tlaib's quote to include, the war crimes of October 7th, which is Hamas against Israel, should not be responded to with war crimes from Israel, which is actually pretty balanced commentary from Rashida Tlaib to end up on Fox News or Fox News Sunday. But they show that whole quote, but of course Mike Pompeo does not respond to the war crimes part, only about the ceasefire part, and how Israel has to just be given carte blanche to destroy Hamas as quickly as possible. And then Shannon Bream does not follow up on the war crimes aspect at all. So I don't even know why they included that in the Rashida Tlaib quote, but I'll talk about that a little more after we watch that penultimate newsmaker clip together over here.
Okay, so with news of a potential ceasefire deal, let's pivot back to the Middle East. There is no debate that there are civilian lives that are being lost in Gaza over the current operations. Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, who is a Palestinian American herself, is among those calling not just for this humanitarian pause, but she wants a ceasefire. And here's what she's saying this weekend about U.S. continued support for Israel.
We're done supporting and funding this violence. We're done watching children being pulled out of the rubble, blood coming down their faces. We're tired of allowing folks to be able to think that the answer to war crimes on October 7th was more war crimes.
So how do you answer these growing concerns about the reality of civilian deaths that are happening right now in Gaza?
Shannon, the singular best way to protect the people that are living in the Gaza Strip is the destruction and annihilation of Hamas. It's pretty straightforward, and it should be done as quickly as possible. The lives that they've lived over the last years sitting under a terrorist government have not been good lives. The fact that Israel is now determined to do it is something that is both decent and moral and good for the people living there, good for the people of Israel, and great for the United States of America as well. I listened to her talk. There's a lot of discussion about what's going to happen the day after, Shannon. Think about what the day after looks like if Hamas is not destroyed. If Hamas is not destroyed, this destruction, this death will continue. Iran will feel like it got an enormous victory, and the Russians, the Chinese, and the Iranians will all continue their terror campaigns and their efforts all across the globe if they think the West isn't prepared to do the most basic task of government, and that is to protect its own citizens. I hope that Israel will do this quickly. I hope that they will do this with enormous decency and protect civilians to the maximum extent possible. But the requirement to destroy Hamas and to send a message to the world that the West is serious about protecting its traditions is a requirement of every government.
You and I have a mutual friend, Joel Rosenberg, who lives and works in the Middle East. He's the editor-in-chief of All Israel News and All Arab News, a couple of sources there. He has put out an urgent call for help for Christians who are in Gaza. He says they're sheltering.
I just kept that playing to show that Shannon Bream did not follow up on the war crimes issue. You saw Mike Pompeo give like a little bit of lip service to we should do as much as possible to minimize civilian casualties, but the number one goal is to destroy Hamas. And the follow-up was, well, aren't some Palestinians Christians? Can we do anything to protect the Palestinians who are Christians? I understand that you don't really care about war crimes, but what about the Christians? That's how I interpreted that follow-up from Shannon Bream. But my longtime viewers know I'm not a big fan of Shannon Bream. But that was the penultimate newsmaker clip, which means that the final newsmaker clip is next, and it is sort of off topic. It's Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida, who did an extended interview with Jake Tapper on CNN's State of the Union yesterday. And I kind of like the way that Jake Tapper did this cross-examination of him on whether he will condemn anti-Semitism and support of anti-Semitism from people on the right, and specifically from Elon Musk on Twitter, or I guess it's now X. Elon Musk responded to this tweet or X post or whatever you call it over the weekend that supported this whole anti-Semitic conspiracy that Jews are, the Jews will not replace us chant from Charlottesville in the early years of the Trump administration, where apparently Jews are trying to bring in a horde of minority immigrants to replace white people. That's the conspiracy theory. And Elon Musk basically responded to a tweet claiming that and said it was true. And Ron DeSantis launched his presidential campaign on Twitter. I think it was actually still called Twitter then. And I find it very unlikely that he had no idea what Elon Musk said before he went on CNN's State of the Union, but he claims not to know what it is. that Elon Musk was talking about. So Jake Tapper helps him and like shows the tweet and what Elon Musk says, and he still kind of wriggles out of it. But I really like the follow-up question from Jake Tapper, especially given the clips we've seen without any good follow-ups. And I'll talk about that a little more after we watch Ron DeSantis try to get out of the only thing missing from this cross-examination is Jake Tapper talking about how, like, Nick Fuentes and anti-Semitic Holocaust deniers went and had dinner with Trump at Mar-a-Lago. That should have entered into this conversation somewhere, but didn't. And I'll talk about that a little more after we watch that final Newsmaker clip together over here.
It happened the other day that I wondered what you thought about, because you launched your campaign on Twitter, now known as X. And right now, major companies such as Apple and Disney are pulling their ads from X because Elon Musk openly endorsed this anti-Semitic conspiracy theory that Jews are conspiring to replace white Americans with minority immigrants. I wondered if you saw the comment and if you condemn it.
I did not see the comment, and so I know that Elon has had a target on his back ever since he purchased Twitter, because I think he's taking it in a direction that a lot of people who are used to controlling the narrative don't like. So I was a big supporter of him purchasing Twitter. I think they're obviously still working some stuff out, but I did not see those comments.
All right, well, let me just show you. So here's a post claiming that Jews are pushing dialectical hatred against whites and are flooding the country with hordes of minorities, and Elon Musk replies, "You have said the actual truth." He goes on to say that he's talking about the ADL and other Jewish groups are pushing replacements of whites. It's a lot of condemnation for singling out a specific religious group during this time of rapidly rising anti-Semitism. I know you've been very out front when you see anti-Semitism on the left. Is anti-Semitism on the right something that concerns you as well?
Across the board. And actually, I think in the advent of these attacks, the amount of anti-Semitism that we've seen has really surprised me. And I'm somebody that signed major legislation in Florida to combat anti-Semitism on college campuses. And yet what you've seen come out since then, and you have seen it on both sides. But I would say this, the difference is that on the left, that tends to be attached to some major institutional power, like some of our most august universities, whereas I think on the right, it tends to be, more fringe voices that are doing it, but it's wrong no matter what, and I don't think that we've seen anti-Semitism this bad in the world probably since the Second World War.
I don't know how fringe the voices are, to be completely frank. I mean, Elon Musk is the wealthiest man in the world, and we've seen some major conservative media figures, Charlie Kirk, Candace Owens, and others pushing really, really hateful stuff, backing this nonsensical theories of white genocide, white replacement theory. And I would ask that major Republican figures like you use your voices as well to stand against it. But let's turn to another topic.
Yeah, but Jake, with all due respect, with all due respect on that, I mean, to have somebody who's like blogging and doing stuff like that, okay, that's an issue. But to compare that for how some of these most powerful universities in the country have responded to this, we have Jewish students fleeing for their lives because you have angry mobs, and yet they have not done what they need to do to protect the safety and well-being of those students. I have constituents in Florida whose kids don't even want to go to campus in the advent of this because of such a hostile environment. So I do think on the institutional side, you've seen this become part of a left-wing movement, a very significant pro-Hamas movement, and it is backed by institutional power.
Yeah, absolutely. Jewish students, just like Muslim students, black students, gay students, all students should feel safe on campuses, and the concern Jewish students have right now is very serious. I'm just saying, Elon Musk is a pretty powerful guy, and he's out there endorsing some pretty hideous anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, and I still haven't heard you condemn it.
Well, because I haven't seen it. I know you tried to read. I have no idea what the context is. I know Elon Musk. I've never seen him do anything. I think he's a guy that believes in America. I've never seen him indulge in any of that. So it's surprising if that's true, but I have not seen it, so I don't want to sit there and pass judgment on the fly.
Let's turn to President Biden this week at his
So yeah, that was a pretty good cross-examination from Jake Tapper. I picked it as the cross-examination of the week. He did bring up like Charlie Kirk and Candace Owens, and I saw a comment on that in the live comments while we were watching it. But my one criticism would be the whole like Nick Fuentes and the Kanye West meetings with Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago, and that is like, I don't know, that seems also like a good rebuttal to the institutional power argument that Governor Ron DeSantis was trying to make about how there's more anti-Semitism and institutional power on the left than on the right, and that leaves out the whole Donald Trump factor, even though Jared Kushner is his son-in-law, right? He has Jewish grandchildren. I remember that, but I don't know. I'm not sure that is like a total immunity from anti-Semitism from Trump, but that is, I guess, an issue for another day. This last clip was a little bit off topic, but kind of fit in there, and it doesn't really answer the foreign policy problems of the Biden administration. But I mean, that's the thing, that Biden isn't like running against generic Republican or whatever, which also came up in the Steve Kornacki poll in part of the clip I didn't show, where like generic Republican is beating Biden by a lot, but generic Democrat beats Trump by a lot. But that's not the election we're going to have. It's going to probably be Biden versus Trump. I mean, there are a lot of things that could happen that might not make that true, but it seems the most likely possibility right now. And remember, Trump is out there saying, like, expel Palestinians, expel Muslims and Palestinians from the United States. Is that like the policy that the 18 to 34-year-olds who are unhappy with Biden are going to vote for? Or are they going to vote for, like, the Mike Pompeo, well, they should care about civilians, but the most important thing is as quickly as possible, blowing things up in Gaza or whatever his policy was. And I mean, that's the thing. The actual Trump or Republican policy on Israel versus Hamas is so much worse from what the young progressives in the Democratic Party are criticizing the Biden administration for, that when it comes down to a choice between two, Biden can still win back those voters, is the point I'm trying to make. And I hope you enjoyed all the points I tried to make during my Monday media mix-up, and the time and effort I put into picking out the clips and adding my media criticism and political commentary. I don't think I'll be back later this week for any more videos unless something extraordinary happens, but I will be back every Monday through January 2025 to comment on the ongoing campaign between Biden and Trump, if that's what it turns out to be, and criticizing the big five corporate outlets and how they're covering the news. And it could be very soon that I'll be able to give you some sort of pet clips at the end of the broadcast. In this last week, we finally cleaned up the last of the carpets that were pet damaged, and we're actively considering getting some new pets, maybe even this week. Next week, I think it could still be in 2023 that there will be new pets and new pet clips at the end of the Monday Media Mix-Up. So look forward to that for those people who watched all the way to the end to find out. My most loyal viewers will find that out at the end of the video. And anyway, more news on that next Monday. And I hope you all have a good holiday week, and I'll see you all next week. And until then, I guess I will just see you all around the internet.